The Union had made great strides towards space in the last year, especially with the Union space program's crowning achievement, Gaia 21. Yet, the previous year had also brought with it a financial strain that nearly brought the USP to bankruptcy. Gaia 21 was a boon, proving to Parliament that the civilian space program was worth funding. The next goal, however, was already on the horizon. The Union must be the first to put a Kerbal into space. Heyo folks, and welcome back to Boldly Go, my Kerbal Space Program series focusing on realism, storytelling, and a historical progression. In the last episode, we managed to get to orbit for the first time, with Gaia 23? Yeah, Gaia 23. However, we got there after a lot of unfortunate accidents that brought our program to the brink of bankruptcy. Gaia 23 really did prove to save the entire playthrough. We are able to keep going and do a lot of interesting stuff, pushing the way towards manned spaceflight, as mentioned in the intro, but it has unfortunately still not given us the sense of security that we would have liked. We got to orbit using basically a pile of fireworks without any sort of active control for the probe itself, no scientific instruments on the payload, and once we got into space, the probe was effectively dead. We just sent it up to complete the contract, effectively. This is because the VAB, the Vertical Assembly Building, really has no room in terms of part count in order to let me build anything more complicated. So, what are we doing here? This is a Heyo. This is, originally I started designing it to be an orbital probe to collect science before I realized that I'm not going to be able to get a probe that complicated up to orbit. But we desperately need science in order to unlock new things to continue the program forward. As a matter of fact, you can see here, this is me thinking of how the hell am I going to get this into space, or at the very least into the upper atmosphere so we can glide back down and collect all the science. And the answer is I don't. I scrapped this booster pretty quickly as soon as I realized that there's really no feasible way for me to get the center of thrust underneath the center of mass. So yeah, this is a bit anachronistic. I don't believe that humanity ever did something like this. But yeah, so I suppose in the To Boldly Go universe, Kerbal's figured out UAVs way faster than us humans did. Anywho, after realizing I can't send the thing to space, I'm strapping a booster on the bottom of it to help it lift off and get into the air. And yeah, this is more or less the completed design for the Heyo drones. I only used them a few times. They've, as you will see soon, they've proven to be a little unreliable and not worth the cost associated with using them. But yeah, with the design finalized, and after doing a couple of minor tweaks on the runway, getting the flap set up, which I forgot to do, we send off Heyo the first flight, and immediately we hit the ground. Great start. On the second flight, I figure, we just didn't have the necessary takeoff speed, so I allow the solid rocket booster to actually do its job, let us get up to speed, and lift off. Until we start drifting back down. I realize I'm not getting the speed that I need, and you saw it there for just a split second. The reason is I had turned down the throttle on the jet engine whilst I was trying to configure the thing for orbital flight back when I was trying to strap the booster onto it in the VAB. With that failure, we come back. I've managed to turn the throttle limiter on the jet engine back up, and we are on to the third flight of Heyo. And this time we actually get off and stay off the ground, thankfully. It needs to fly a little fast with how small the wings are, but as you can see here, we are well underway, and I go into that fairing in order to start setting off our science experiments. Immediately, as you can see, we're starting to get science returned back to the KSC, or excuse me, the USC, the Union Space Center. But yeah, I'm looking here to see what biomes we can get, and I realized that the shoreline hasn't been completed for a lot of our science experiments, so I begin to fly over it. Rather cloudy and dreary day over the USC, as a matter of fact. But as we get underway, we are treated with a few wonderful views of the shoreline and a Poyo flying right along. Returning back to the launch pad, we have the launch of Gaia 24. This is exactly the same model of rocket that we used for the previous Gaia launch, the one that got us into orbit. Essentially just doing the same exact thing again to prove that this design of rocket can reliably get us into orbit, which it can't, as a matter of fact. You will see here shortly that we don't quite make it, despite the fact that we took roughly the same trajectory as in Gaia 23. I genuinely couldn't tell you what went wrong. Everything seemed mostly flawless. Except, yep, as the final booster cuts out, we are left 100 meters short of orbit. We return back to the launch pad once again for the launch of Gaia 25. This is the exact same model as Gaia 24. However, this mission profile is sending us on a polar launch trajectory for a contract we needed to complete. Interestingly, despite being more Delta V intensive, we managed to get it on our first try. After the successful launch of our polar rocket and the failure of our second normal orbital mission, I decide to go back to the drawing board entirely for Gaia 25, attempting to design something that will actually be able to get to orbit and return, as per a contract we need to do. Unfortunately, at this stage, I am being heavily constricted by the fact that we only have 40 parts to work with in the VAB. That means that any probe I design is going to be extremely limited in its capabilities. That is why Gaia 23 was extremely primitive. It's not necessarily that I didn't have the capability to make something more advanced, it's that anything more advanced would require more parts, which would mean that I'm unable to even get it up to orbit. For this craft, I actually go back to the drawing board quite significantly. I use a heavier probe core, but by doing that, I'm able to gain access to SAS, and with those two miniature engines on the side, I have active control and stability assist. This means that I am still able to control the craft while it's in orbit by simply firing up the engines just a little bit to allow them to turn us. And during firing, it is able to keep us in a stable trajectory. No more having to babysit the little RCS thrusters that I used to have to put on there. So instead of having to have an RCS tank along with the thrusters to keep the thing stable, I'm able to rely on the engines themselves to keep us in position. All in all, this should be a much more capable rocket. As you can see here, I'm trying to figure out what I can do for these side boosters, and it turns out we unlocked these much more powerful engines. However, I'm now having to come up against the weight limit for the launch pad. as you can see, I'm still heavily constrained despite having better technology at this point, allowing us to make more complicated rockets. With the launch of Gaia 26, we are now hopefully going to see this newest rocket design in action. Another stormy day at the USC as we break through the cloud layer. You can see me here actually flying the craft. I believe this may be the first time I've actually shown true gameplay of me flying a rocket. The thing flies quite well. Unfortunately, it is still heavily dependent on me flying it correctly. There's very little margin for error in this design. The upper stage rockets are more efficient, but also have a much lower thrust-to-weight ratio. As a result, yeah, I have to fire for quite a long time in order to get into orbit, until we have a engine failure. This means that I no longer have active control of the craft, and our first attempt at an orbit and return is a failure. After yet another failure for the USP, we return for Gaia 27 for another typical launch. Once again, we are attempting to go for an orbit and return, using the same model of rocket, as it appears that the issue was with the engines, not the craft itself. As a result, I have increased the engine quality for the craft, and we see it off on its way. Successfully in orbit, I realized that I forgot to put a heat shield on the craft. As a result, Gaia 27 now just lives in orbit. Remembering the heat shield this time, we launch Gaia 28. We're getting up there in number, aren't we, folks? This is, get this, the same exact rocket. It's just I slapped a heat shield on the bottom of the probe this time. Launching on a foggy day in the middle of Camber, we are able to lift up above the fog and the cloud layers below as we head off to orbit. Until the engine explodes during booster separation. On another stormy day, we launch Gaia 29. This is the same exact rocket, with the side boosters moved down ever so slightly. Can you see why we're constantly on the verge of bankruptcy? As we go through the cloud layer and come up above to a sunshiny, clear day, we are once again attempting orbit. That's right, you saw the boosters miss that time. And we have another engine failure. The mission is a dud. We need a success. So, On November 12th, we launch Loma 1, our first lunar mission. We've proven we can get to orbit, and we've proven we can get to orbit with a decent amount of fuel left. We just need to see how far we can actually push that. The boosters miss the main rocket, allowing the mission to continue. We slowly drift toward orbit in order to eventually push our way onto the Mun. Unfortunately, our technology just isn't quite there yet, as I would have hoped. On attempting to circularize, the probe is just too heavy with too low of a thrust-to-weight ratio to get into orbit the first time how I would have liked. As a result, we have to spend a lot of excess fuel and getting into orbit at all, instead of burning up in the atmosphere, before starting our transmunner injection burn. Because of the low thrust-to-weight ratio, we're forced to burn twice, and regardless, Loma 1 does not make it anywhere near to the Mun. However, we are treated with the furthest views of Kerbal we've ever gotten before. No camera on board because of the part limit, but we are able to get science from up high for the first time. Gaia 30 is our next mission, attempting to do much of the same. We are still trying to do our orbit and return mission. I keep forgetting heat shields and using older designs by accident, as you may have saw earlier when I was very confident I put a heat shield on the craft, when in reality I did not. However, this mission too is doomed to fail, as we are unable to reach orbit in time and dip back into the atmosphere, the probe slowly losing control and burning up as it re-enters. Except, this time, I remembered the goddamn heat shield. Though we are treated to some fireworks on the way back in, the probe survives re-entry. If we can just get to orbit, then we know we can get back home. Gaia 31 is, I hope, the mission that will do this. A pretty standard ascent profile. This time I'm actually showing you the full gameplay of it. You see there that once we drop off the boosters, we actually lose a decent bit of velocity just attempting to fight gravity. As we get higher though, the engine is able to output a bit more power, letting us get into orbit, or up into space properly. As the second stage kicks in, those are two engines that are better optimized for the vacuum. We just continue accelerating as normal, pitching up every once in a while to try to keep the apoapsis from reaching us, especially as those little engines kick in. Once again, we are unable to reach orbit by the time we reach our apoapsis. However, this time we have just enough velocity to fight it enough to stay afloat. You can see there I am angling up significantly, and as the orbit line continues on, I am forced to wait until the next comms station to continue trying to raise our orbit. We are on a knife's edge, but we just about managed to get it with 200 meters per second of delta V to spare. Not wanting to waste any time and frankly just wanting to get back home, I immediately turn the rocket back around and fire until we are practically empty. Coming back into the atmosphere over Kerbin, over the KSC or USC, I suppose, we are treated once again to a fireworks show. We're doing something a little different now, going back to the spaceplane hangar. We are attempting to reach the upper atmosphere in a manned craft. You saw before the Firebird used in episode 1, however, it was extremely unstable, and I decided not to use it until we got a bit of better technology. Well, the day has come. With the contract to get up to, I believe it is 19 kilometers in the atmosphere, I upgrade the Firebird with new and improved wings, control surfaces, and hopefully this will make it a lot more stable. The cherry on top, however, is adding on 2 rocket boosters to hopefully be able to get us up to the upper atmosphere. Jebediah Kerman takes the helm and is now flying the first attempt at an upper atmospheric flight. Light up, and the craft pitches up to try to reach the upper atmosphere. However, getting distracted by a view of the moon above, we lose control. The solid rocket boosters are quickly ejected, and I attempt to pull out of a dead spin as our altitude rapidly decreases. A motion sickness-induced fight to the end begins, where I am desperately trying to regain control of the plane to keep poor Jebediah Kerman from dying before we even are able to reach space. For a brief moment, it seems like I'm able to regain control. However, as we begin to pitch down and the plane faces towards the prograde direction, a vision of blue fills the screen. I desperately begin to try to pull up before hitting the ocean, causing us once again to enter a spin less than 1,000 meters above the surface. Thankfully, however, after our rough landing, Jebediah survives. Never again, I declare, as we begin work immediately on the Firebird C-300, our third version of this spaceplane. Instead of wing-mounted solid rocket boosters, I decide to just keep them on the plane and mount them in the tail. This makes the plane much more prone to tail strikes. However, it's not like we're really going to be flying this that much anyway. With the redesign in progress, I'm also changing out where the engine nacelles go and making sure this time that the plane's center of mass and center of thrust are well balanced, both while dry and filled with fuel. Hopefully, this will allow us to reach the upper atmosphere without any significant trouble. take off on the 16th of November. Piloted by brave Valentina Kerman, we are once again trying to reach the upper atmosphere. As we reach 10,000 meters, we light up the solid rocket boosters in the rear of the plane, and begin to pitch up. This time, the Firebird C300 handles much better than its predecessors, allowing us to keep control through the burn. As Jebediah's altitude climbs ever higher, both Jebediah and Mission Control watch the telemetry readouts with bated breath. Will they be able to cross 19 kilometers above the surface? Will they be able to get to the upper atmosphere before the solid rocket boosters run out? Shortly before 18,000, the solid rockets cut out, but our altitude continues increasing, all the way past 19,000. Jebediah is treated with a beautiful view of Kerbal from the upper atmosphere before beginning his descent back down. As we begin to wrap up this episode, I want to thank you all for watching and taking the time out of your day to watch me go through this little space program of mine. I am slowly building out more lore to add more storytelling elements, and if you want to see more of what is going on behind the scenes and what I'm doing off screen, go ahead and check out my Discord and my Patreon. There I will be uploading more stuff. Please do like and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps me out a lot, and I love hearing y'all's feedback too, so please feel free to let me know what y'all think. I know that not much seems to have been accomplished in this episode, but we are making progress, and it will be rewarded in a big way in the next episode. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. I'm the Kumu Courtwade, and see y'all next time.